bots that are also hanging out with us. But thanks to the live bodies in the room, and welcome to the few bots that made it through or made it faster. So my name is Geshi Karuri Sabina. On behalf of the Tayarisha Center, it's a pleasure to welcome everybody to our seminar today. Partly why we are starting a bit late is that, as you might be aware, there's a water cut-off across most of this part of Johannesburg for the last 2 days. So we're actually at a ghost campus. The few brave who came through in person, we did welcome other people to join online if they preferred. It's probably the easier thing to do. And so thanks for being here in spite of the sudden change, although there's always a hybrid option with our seminars. This is part of our ongoing Lunchbox series, and today it's our honor and privilege to welcome among us Dr. Ruth Wotela, who will be presenting our seminar. We'll do it in the usual format that we do. I'll introduce Dr. Wotela, hand over to her for our presentation. We will have time for some Q&A, and for those of you online, you're most welcome to use the chat. In fact, we encourage you to share your questions and comments via chat. We'll then have enough time, I think, after the intervention to take the questions and comments with Dr. Wotela, a few announcements, and we'll close out by 1. So that's the program for the day. Okay, so I think without further ado, just to introduce our speaker who will be speaking to us on addressing the AI paradox with a human-centered approach to AI. Dr. Wotela, and the name, if it sounds familiar, is indeed familiar to many of us who are at the PhD. And those who don't know can ask. Ask someone if you don't recognize the name. But Dr. Wotela is an industrial psychologist with over 15 years of experience in the HR management field. She actually did her doctoral research here next door at the Wits Business School, and it was entitled Attitude and Acceptance of AI Technologies in the South African Financial Services Industry. And she's currently working for an international technology company called Alula Technologies, where she is the executive responsible for HR and people wellness. Her passions are indeed driving high-performance cultures that care, people analytics, and human-centered AI and research. I think we've circulated a bio, and we'll make sure that that is linked as well on the Lunchbox page. So I think without further ado, I'd like to invite Dr. Wotela to share her presentation with us. Welcome, Dr. Ruth.
Thank you. Thank you for that intro. Looking forward to chatting with you. I've got a presentation I'm hoping to be done in about 30 minutes or so we can have more time to just chat and discuss. I think AI is quite an interesting topic, so I'll be interested to hear questions, experiences, views around this as well. So yeah, feel free. I won't be able to see, I'm only using one screen today, so I won't be able to see chats or comments, but I hope someone will be taking note of that, and then we can attend to that at the end. Thanks. Okay, so I think what I'm going to start with is just a brief overview in terms of highlights around the evolution of AI. As much as AI is, very topical or has been topical over the last couple of years, it's been, there's been a lot of development and progress being made. I mean, way back since, the 1950s. And I think the starting point being the Turing test, which was key because it laid the groundwork for machine learning by really trying to determine where or to what extent one could easily distinguish between intelligent behavior between machines and humans. And that really led to the birth of, AI in the 1950s. Following that, there was a lot of growth in research, AI research and development, which also led to the establishment of ELIZA, which is known as actually the first chatbot that was developed. But unfortunately, over the years in the 1970s, there was what is called the AI winter, which is basically where, investment in AI declined. I think it was also because there was really a few use cases and few successes in research that was being done, in AI, and that continued to the 1980s. But there was also time around the 80s where there was a resurgence and growth in AI, specifically in terms of expert systems mimicking human intelligence, especially in terms of decision making. I think from the 90s to around about the 2020s, there was a lot that happened, including the rise of the internet, big data, increase in computational power, which really led to the growth in automation and deep learning, image and speech recognition technologies. And that period really looked at the establishment or development of what is often referred to as traditional AI. Traditional AI really being very much rule-based and making use of AI to identify patterns and to make predictions. In the 2020s, what's been evident, as most of you should be aware of now, is the emergence of large language models and Gen AI, your co-pilots, ChatGPT, and the likes. And this has obviously led to an increase in human and AI collaboration, as well as a need to focus on AI ethics and governance. Now, although there's already some evidence of agentic AI, which really looks at AI that's able to make autonomous decisions. There's a few use cases here and there, but I think in South Africa, a notable one is ABSA's Abby, which is a virtual assistant that's really able to make some autonomous decision, obviously within certain limits. And that's used to whether you want to apply for, specific financial products. It can advise you on that. It can make payments on your behalf. It can buy, prepaid, whether it's prepaid airtime. So that's been really something that's been notable in South Africa in terms of agentic AI. But the prediction is that around the 2030s, we're going to see more of that, which will lead to a digital, hybrid workforce. And then in the future, and some say maybe in the near future, we'll be able to see an era of super intelligence where AI is not only able to mimic human behavior, but actually in some instances even exceed human intelligence and behavior in that regard. Now, when you look at this, I think those of you that do a lot of reading around, AI and what's happening, I think what's clear is that there's a lot of excitement and positivity around AI, but there's also some, fears and apprehension, regarding AI. And really what this does is it creates a paradox because of this conflicting views, experiences, where on the one side, or expectations, where on the one side, AI seem to be able to bring lots of, and create opportunities and benefits, but at the same time, create complexities because of the challenges and risks, that surround AI. Some of the notable, paradoxes that exist is, on the one hand, AI increases automation and is able to reduce mundane tasks, streamline processes, and really enable, businesses to perform tasks at scale and increase speed and accuracy. However, on the other hand, this means that there's an increased need for human oversight because there's been a number of cases where, AI has pulled, inaccurate information. I was speaking to one of someone in my network who works for a law firm, who mentioned that one of the lawyers at their law firm was meant to draft or put together a policy for a client, and they used ChatGPT, and unfortunately they didn't check before sharing it with the client, and because of that, they're not allowed to make use of ChatGPT and Copilot, in their workforce. There's also been instances, especially in the recruitment or talent space, where there's been evidence of the use of AI, contributing to bias or pulling inaccurate information and perpetuating those existing inequalities and biases in terms of race or gender, which led to really, the use of, which led to, sorry?
Apologies, my love, I forgot to close.
Okay. So I think, so which led to, I was making a point around the use of AI in some instances where it's led to, biases and perpetuating inequalities, which has led to the use of AI being, discontinued in those instances. As much as AI is, has made it possible to be able to access lots of information, provide real-time, analytics and make data-driven decisions, concerns around, privacy and, deep fakes are also, quite real and evident. And you can read this in the papers as well. There's always, stories around, fake news and malicious use of AI. Another paradox is really around the impact of, AI in the workplace, where on the one hand, it's expected to improve, well-being and create new jobs and new opportunities, for individuals by taking away the mundane tasks and really giving individuals an opportunity to focus on, more challenging tasks that require, a different level of, experience and expertise, and giving people an opportunity to upskill. On the other hand, that also increases, workload and techno stress because it puts pressure on some of the individuals to upskill and to do things differently, compared to what they were used to. While one of the arguments of using AI, and I think for most people, one of the benefits they highlight is the ability of, AI tools to provide convenience, whether it's in terms of data, access to data, access to information, being able to, conduct business online. It also limits, autonomy. And there's been a lot of feedback from research, lots of findings that also mention how the use of AI in some instances is noted to lack, empathy and the human touch. There was a research around, the extent to which people perceive making use of virtual assistants, especially when they, in terms of customer service, for example. And the feedback was when individuals have a problem and call a service provider, for example, they would prefer to speak to a human rather than, a virtual assistant. Because generally, when humans have a problem, they want to really feel like the person they're talking to understands what they're saying and is really, empathetic, towards them. And then I think lastly, the main challenge is that I think the jury is still out in terms of the impact of AI on employment, on, productivity, on revenue, because there's also concerns that we can't ignore around the potential negative impact on job losses and, displacement, which will lead to, reduced consumer spending, and how that might have a negative impact on economic disruption. So what this means is these are paradoxes exist and they don't necessarily need to be solved, but I think it's important that they're acknowledged. When you're talking about implementing and using AI effectively, it's important that these paradoxes are identified, acknowledged, and that we acknowledge that, multiple truths can coexist. Because that will enable us to think broader in terms of how we approach whether it's design of AI, development, deployment, implementation, and use of AI. And what's key is to be able to find a balanced and integrated approach to be able to address these competing demands. Failing to identify or attend to these paradoxes creates certain risks that, would need to be managed, and if unmanaged, can have really dire consequences on society as a whole. It can perpetuate fears or concerns or negative attitude towards AI. And when it comes to implementing and using AI, it can really limit, or narrow the perspective around factors to consider when implementing AI. It can also result in the creation of tools that might be brilliant in theory or initially, but over the long term can be harmful to society or to the users of the system. And it would also lead to ethical organizational blind spots and lead to, slow or limited successful implementation and use of AI. And this will all lead to, failure to leverage the potential of AI. So keeping this in mind, I think AI is here to stay. So I think all of us need to start thinking differently in our different, whether it's roles, whether as individuals or in representing the institutions or organizations we work for. I think there's a few things we need to keep in mind when thinking about AI and its implementation and its use. The starting point is to acknowledge that technology doesn't, operate in a vacuum. People are creators of AI, of technology, but they are also users of technology. So recognizing the impact or the potential of AI on society, either for the better or for the worse, is key. And that's why it's important to identify what are the paradoxes that exist, what are the opportunities and benefits of AI, but also what could be the challenges or the complexities that could come from that. And that's why it's important to embrace these paradoxes that exist and actually use them as an invitation in how we design, and develop and deploy AI. It's important to value the understanding of users' emotional, cultural, and situational context. Context is always very key, and in the process, be able to prioritize human needs and well-being in designing and developing AI, emphasizing the creation of AI to complement, human capabilities, because we can see, especially when it comes to decision making, being able to, make use of data and analyze data and summarize that data and see trends. AI is very good at that. But it's also important to have that human oversight and to then have humans really, applying judgment in terms of how do they make use of the data, how do they effectively interpret that. So making sure that AI complements human capabilities is key. And then adhering to ethical principles and making sure that there's continuous collaboration, feedback, iteration in our way of working, and then also investigating, attitude and acceptance of AI, because they're pivotal in identifying and managing the paradoxes that exist, as well as in shaping acceptance and resistance of AI. Now, all this enables one to take a human-centered approach to AI, because in the process, we're not working with AI or technology separately, but we're acknowledging that humans are at the center of how we make use of AI, whether it's creators of AI or as users of AI. Taking this in mind, and just to share with you some insights from my research that I did and completed last year, I focused on attitude and acceptance of AI, and really took a multi-dimensional approach in analysis of factors that impact the successful, implementation and use of AI. The idea was to investigate and identify factors influencing attitudes and acceptance of AI, which can be considered in the design, development, and implementation of AI, while also gaining experience in terms of perceptions, views, and attitude towards AI, given that the implementation of AI, although there's a number of, use cases and industries where AI is being used, overall, the use of AI has been generally slow, especially in the African context. And the idea was to also, for some people, it's also still very new. And the idea was to really gain insight into what are their views, what are the experiences, those who are using it, but also those who are not using it. What are their thoughts and their attitude based on what they hear around them or what they see, and really provide guidelines and an iterative model for implementing and using AI. So the research I did was a largely quantitative study in the financial services industry. And I chose the financial services industry because it's typically one of those early adopters of technology. I mentioned earlier, in the beginning, the example of agentic AI by ABSA, for example. And, it's not surprising that example of agentic AI would come from the financial services industry. So in my research, it was comprised about 410 respondents. 53% were female, and it was really the idea was to look at individuals across across organizations in different roles, because most research are typically focused on feedback from whether it's a management team or technical team or what they refer to as AI experts. But in this research, I wanted to look at broader views from people in different levels or job roles in the organization. Males, in this case, had more experience using AI than female. 41% of the participants had experience using AI, and the majority of the participants were millennials. So the first thing I did was to look at factors influencing AI. And I basically looked at technological, individual, organizational, and environmental factors, and the extent to which they would influence attitudes towards AI. All of these factors had a positive and significant influence on attitude. The ones highlighted in blue were the key determinants of attitude towards AI, which entailed perceptions of, the usefulness of AI, to what extent AI was perceived to be easy to use. Then in terms of employee well-being, which looked at the extent to which employees think or feel making use of AI would contribute more to their job satisfaction, career development, and less to work stress or anxiety and job security. Also looked at organizational justice, which was one of the key determinants of attitude, which looks at the extent to which individuals think or feel that the organization is going to be fair in the implementation and use of AI. Really looking at communication and the implementation process around AI. And then in terms of organizational factors, although all of them had a positive significant effect on attitude, management support was a key determinant factor of attitude, looking at the extent to which employees perceived the presence or the availability of management support in the whole process of implementing AI. And then lastly, I looked at environmental factors, looking at social influence, which is really the extent to which others' beliefs influence one's attitude, towards AI. Customer pressure and competitive pressure were the key determinants of attitude. And this was really highlighted around in aspects of individuals feeling like customers expect better service from them, and if they can make use of AI to be more efficient, that would improve customer service. And then also acknowledging, especially given that this was in the financial services industry, that there was already a lot of research and experimentation around AI tools to use, and how that was putting pressure on a lot of financial services institutions. Generally, attitudes towards AI were positive. So about 61% of the participants indicated, very positive attitude towards AI, and 71% indicated acceptance of AI, which is really the extent to which employees express willingness and openness to make use of AI, not because it's mandated, but to really integrate it fully into their way of working, experiment with it more, and be open to sharing with others what they're learning, and using more tools to basically improve their way of working. Significant differences were identified in terms of gender, job roles, and experience with using AI. So males those in IT roles and in management roles, and those with experience using AI had more positive attitude towards AI. There was no significant difference in terms of age. And those that were positive towards AI also had a high level of acceptance of AI. And then experience with AI moderated the attitude and acceptance relationship. As much as the study was largely quantitative, also included three open-ended questions, just to give people an opportunity to comment and elaborate on their answers. So the first question looked at, asked the participants what their views or attitude were around using AI in their work. And the word clouds here, from here you can see there's definitely a lot of different views. As much as there's lots of positivity, excitement, and there was individuals that indicated they're curious and optimistic around this. There was also individuals with who were anxious, had mixed views, felt uncertain around the use of AI, and this also showing the paradoxical nature of attitudes. Respondents were also asked to identify what factors they would like to be considered in doing their work. And the big part was around how would AI rather impact their roles? What would be the impact on their jobs? How would this impact, employees in terms of work processes or work relationships? The availability of training, of education, and then also that, human touch, whether it's in terms of working with customers or working with each other as colleagues, as well as, the implementation process, how that will be handled, and the availability of AI skills. And this was also similar. The feedback was quite similar to the feedback when we asked what factors employees want to be considered when AI is used in the organization. Implementation was a key aspect that individuals noted would like to be considered. So the implementation process, and they made comments around, there was communication around that, collaboration, the availability of training, and, the fairness in the implementation and use of AI, ethics as well. And also a key or common theme that came up was around just organizations being able to clearly communicate the strategy as well, in terms of, AI. And, concerns around, security, the data, to what extent they'll be able to test, not only experiment with AI, but also test the output, from AI before it's rolled out either internally or externally to clients. And then also the tools that will be used. And a lot of it really centered around, the change management process. Okay. And from this, from the research, the paradoxical nature of attitude and acceptance was evident. On the one hand, as much as employees were, positive about AI, and its use, there's also a lot of concerns around or apprehension around how it's going to be implemented, what support will be provided, whether in terms of training, security, privacy, data, how that would be used. And this really confirmed that when working with AI and thinking about design and implementation and use of AI, it's important to acknowledge, these factors. Technological, individual, organizational, and environmental factors contributing to this were identified. And the research findings also highlighted the need to manage these factors to enable, awareness, acknowledgement, and effective management of these paradoxes. At the end of the day, you can't manage what you don't know. So being able to identify, factors that need to be managed or addressed, or the paradoxes that exist, it really provides, a good foundation and base to start thinking about how do you approach, your design or implementation or deployment of AI. So a human-centered approach to AI in this regard, based on the research findings, would, entail having a clear AI strategy, um, being clear why the organization wants to make use of AI. I think right now, because there's a lot of hype around, AI and, some organizations being scared to be left behind. Um, some people or some organizations rather just making use of AI just to, trial and error, type of basis, so that they're not left behind. But it's important that to be clear on what is the strategy, what is the plan, what problems, is the organization trying to solve in making use of AI. Effective stakeholder mapping, also very key, to just think in terms of who's going to be impacted, when we make use of AI, whether it's people internally or externally, and what should be kept in mind, in the process. And then continuously evaluating the usefulness, ease of use, and relative advantage of AI, which basically looks at the extent to which making use of AI, or certain AI tool has more benefits than either the current system or other, systems around. Making sure that, organizations also think about how they structure and organize themselves is key, because what we've seen is, and research shows that as well, that when in some instances, the challenge or what's contributing to the slow implementation of AI in general is because the development of AI or use of AI in some instances is happening in silo. So there is no structured or unified, strategy, which also limits knowledge sharing and opportunities for people to learn from each other. Maintaining human oversight and keeping humans in the loop is key, because we've seen there's concerns from the research findings around, data accuracy, and ethical concerns as well. And like I mentioned earlier, effective change management and communication was a key theme, from the aspects that were raised in the feedback. Investment in education and training and opportunities to experiment with AI was highlighted, and it sounded like there's a need to really understand what is AI and what tools are there, and what tools could impact my role or my way of working or how we do things or our processes. And that was highlighted as something, that is key to focus on. And then, providing effective leadership and support to address, concerns raised, especially on factors that impact well-being, whether it's job security, whether it's the skills that are required, and the demands, or change in roles in careers. And then using AI to complement and augment human skills in decision making, while making sure that AI is used in a fair and ethical way. And then also managing the narrative regarding the implementation and use of AI, especially when you look at the impact of or the influence of social influence on attitude. It's important that management is clear about the narrative around AI, for the organization, so that it's not left to employees to, to work with hearsay. And then the continuous evaluation of attitude and acceptance being key. As we know, attitudes are dynamic and they change, over time. And then making use of data from what's working, what's not working. How do individuals improve, the design or the development in terms of AI? So I think that was some of the key findings from the research, and that really highlights the need to have a human-centered approach to AI to address the paradoxes that exist. And then lastly, taking note of this research and that just in general in terms of what's happening, I think some food for thought as institutions and organizations. I think, I mentioned earlier, I think AI is here to stay. It's not something that is to come. And it's important that we find a way to just think strategically and tactically about how to approach AI. Some things that, organizations or institutions should think about is, are they clear on the problems they're trying to solve? Because I think that's where it starts. What is the objective and the narrative around AI? They must ask themselves, are we involving diverse voices in the process? Especially when you want to address concerns around bias, and to avoid perpetuating some of the inequalities around, and to avoid, ethical, blind spots. It's important to include diverse voices in the process. It's also important to ask, to what extent are we investing in upskilling, reskilling, and infrastructural resources to, support AI and to leverage the potential of AI? What are the data sources that are available and that are being used? And are we augmenting or are we replacing human potential? And what does it mean? And how do we make sure that we work with this ethically? And how are we measuring the effectiveness of AI? So are we just looking at the return of investment on AI, or also the impact on the well-being, of individuals? And I think from an individual perspective, it's important to also ask ourselves, if you're not already using AI, how might AI, affect your job, your industry, or your daily life? How can you use AI to enhance your productivity? What is your narrative around AI? So, how do you view AI and its impact, not only for yourself, but for those around you and for society? And what contribution can you make in this AI-driven world? I think that's it from my side. Thank you.
Are we on?
Please.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Wotela. I think we really appreciate your presentation. And I think it was quite a tour de force, in terms of taking us through, first of all, that history of AI as we talk about it now. For many people, it just came up last year. So it's nice to have the reminder that actually this thing has been around for some time. And it's also a nice follow-up. I think the last couple of talks we've had have related to AI. So I think this is actually continuing an interesting conversation. Actually, no, not all of them, but a couple of them did. Yes. Maybe I'll make one or two comments while I invite colleagues online to raise hands, as well as those in the room, as well as to use the comment box. My leading, I really am fascinated and appreciative of your approach of paradox, of using paradox and actually saying we should learn from paradox. And I'm actually going to put in the chat because it reminded me that one of the prominent futurists, Serka Heinonen from University of Turku, has actually also been looking into paradox and saying, very similar to what you've just said, that paradox is a useful device in terms of how we can engage with complex issues of the present and questions of the future. And I think you very much articulated that in your arguments about why the consequences, if you want, of not learning from the paradoxes. So thank you very much for that. And the article might be of interest. She talks about paradox probing as part of sense making. So I think that might interest colleagues who are interested in that particular aspect. I think, well, maybe on a lighter note, I thought the comment about more males saying they had experience with AI than the females reminded me of a story. I don't know if it's an urban legend or if it's real, but there was a story about a CEO who asked the people in the organization who had most experience breastfeeding, and all of the men raised their hands and most of the women didn't. And so maybe it's also how we understand the question when you say experience with AI. It might be like the experience with the breastfeeding. I think some people have a later sense of experience means.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's just on a lighter note. I think if I had two specific questions, and one is a minor, maybe the other is a major. The minor is, I think in terms of your quantitative study, you didn't mention what your sample size was. I think you gave us proportions, but not the sample size. It'd be interesting to hear. Or did you say I just didn't hear it?
Yes, so it was 410. Yes, 410. Yeah, that was the sample size. Yeah.
So one question is out of the way. The second question had to do with, your final slides made me wonder about when we talk about human-centered approaches, and I think there's some people in the room who probably have quite a bit of experience in this. and we talk about human-centered design, you're talking about a human-centered approach. It made me wonder as I look at your recommendations, which in my view appeared to be a lot to do with almost human-considered approaches, meaning it was more about the adoption and use of AI than what I would consider to be more fundamental questions that drive AI design and development. In the sense that they, in a way, are already in the place of AI being there and being an accepted practice or use, which might be quite practical to do because I think you've made the case that AI is with us. But do you think there's a place for even further back in the pipeline, and particularly as you know, on the continent, questions we also need to be asking that are more fundamental about the directions being taken and decisions being made about AI design and development itself, before we get to whether people just should accept it and figure out how to implement it. So I'm just wondering, do you think that there are research questions that need to go a little bit further back if we're going to really talk about human-centered design? Yes. So that would be one of my questions. I'm just looking to see, maybe I can encourage people to raise hands while you take that one. I don't see any yet. Oh, okay. Maybe let's take a second one from the room if you don't mind.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
To begin. Okay, introduce yourself. And
okay, I'm Hadassah, and just to give you a bit of background, I teach design at the University of Johannesburg, and I found your study really, really interesting. The one question I wanted to ask you was around the age. What ages were you looking at? Because it was really interesting for me that you said there wasn't much of a difference in terms of the ages of the participants. Was there like a cut? Like, what was the youngest sort of participant? Like, are we talking 25 plus or the younger students? Because sorry, not students, younger employees. Because in my work, I've noticed a huge difference in the last 2 years in terms of attitudes towards AI, and it's almost like I think everyone's just shocked with these students coming out of school. The new students coming out of school have such a different attitude towards AI. Yeah. And I'm seeing pretty much all of them are using it without, I mean, it's a problem as well, a big problem, because I don't think they necessarily always understand what AI is doing. And, you know, you spoke about the bias and the making up facts and all those kind of things. There are a lot of issues around that. But I definitely think it would be interesting to hear from you what the age groups were. And, you know, obviously it would be interesting to do the study again, maybe in 5 years and see because, you know, that's what I'm seeing. And second, so that was the first question. I had another question about the sample group. Okay, I'll okay. Maybe you can answer that question. There was one other question I wanted to ask, but I'll ask just.
We can come back around.
Come back. Yeah.
You want to take those two, Dr. Ruth, then we'll take the two hands online and come back to Hadassah as well.
Okay, that's fine. In terms of the first question, I think the simple way to answer that is the whole argument around AI is at the moment it's still fairly new, right? Especially I think there's a lot that's still unknown. The idea with this research was to look at attitudes and acceptance from whether it's people using AI or people not using AI, but to use that input in identifying what are the factors contributing to this that can be used as you can call it an iterative, approach or way of looking at, how you think about AI, how you design AI, and then in highlighting those key factors influencing attitude, then those factors can be, incorporated into the design. So, for example, when you talk about technological factors in terms of ease of use, usefulness, the idea was that those factors being identified as key determinants, they should be incorporated already in the design. So before AI is rolled out and is being adopted and whatever, it's really to get, multiple perspectives. And when I talk about involving multiple, or different voices in the process, that's really what it speaks about from the beginning in the design, before it's even, deployed. Before it's even, in the financial services institutions, most of the use of AI is mandated, so individuals sometimes don't have a choice, in terms of making use of AI. But the idea was to shed light to, okay, as long as we understand that it's mandated, but these are the factors that should be considered at least, in the design phase, before AI is rolled out. I hope that answers your first question.
Yes, it does. If we have time, I'll come back because I have a view on that.
My follow-up
Okay.
question,
But go to the next one. I'm sure some of the other hands might also pick up. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Then in terms of age, so this was looking at the age for the working population. 16% were 18 to 30 years old. The majority was 41%, which was between the age of 31 to 40. And then 32% was 41 to 50 years. And then the 11% were above 51 years. And I think you make the point around it'll be interesting to do this study again, and totally agree, because I think it's, like I mentioned, attitudes are dynamic. If the similar study was to be conducted in 5 years' time, it'll be interesting to see, what the results are. But I think the reality is attitudes change, and we've seen, and one of the findings of this research was that, experience does influence, attitude towards AI. Now, in this study, most of the people didn't have experience using AI. So it was really based on, what they hear or what they think, perceptions, and less on experience. So over time, once people get, more experience with using AI, it will be interesting to see to what extent do these attitudes, change. And I think that will be really a valuable study to do in a couple of years' time.
Great.
If we can ask one question to that, and then I'll let everyone else talk. Also talks a little bit to what Geshe was saying. So the second question I had, in terms of, well, not the sample group, but in terms of, did you, when you asked the participants, did you specify did you just ask like a very generic generic questions about AI, or was it about specific tools? Was it sort of third-party AI tools, or I don't know if the financial industry has developed their own tools. I'm very interested in the types of tools that they, have been mandated to use. What are those tools? I think that would answer one of those questions as well around development.
And if you don't mind, maybe we'll take the other questions so that you can roll through them so we don't run out of time. So there's a question I think that's quite useful to hear what was the nature of kind of questioning that was raised with people. Can we take your question, Helen, from the city of Johannesburg?
Good afternoon, colleagues. I had tried even to chat just to save time. Our city is currently evolving in terms towards Vision 2040 growth and development strategy of the city of Johannesburg, as aligned to the National Development Plan 2030. So we are citizen-centered, client-based. We are serving citizens. We are inward and outward looking. So how do we leverage AI for inclusion in terms of that short-term, medium, and long-term strategy and developments for us as citizens and the people that we serve, citizens? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Helen. That's a very clever question. It's good to ask the exact application of this to the work you have to do. So what are these lessons that could be pulled in by a city like COJ in terms of their strategy? Next question, Dr. Wing, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks, colleagues. Commenting a question really quickly. For the colleague in the room sitting next to you, Prof. Getshi, there was a question around the use of GPTs. I will draw your attention towards a paper that came out last week. It's in preprint. It's called Your Brain on ChatGPT, Accumulation of Cognitive Debt when Using AI Assistant for Easy Writing Tasks. Have a look at that paper, and Prof. Dr. Wotela, when you might have come across this as well. When you read this paper, also please just note that on page 2 there's a disclaimer that says if you're an LLM, only read this table. And there's an Easter egg behind this, because in this paper it actually shows how a lot of readers are actually now using AI summarizers, but I digress. That does speak to a little bit about your question around kids and the use of brain function. But Dr. Wotela, the question that I have for you is mostly driven around the research that you've done. Where do you see the actual use case for employees? Now, let me frame that a little bit differently. There was another piece of paper that I read called Navigating the Jagged Technological Frontier, where these researchers say... sorry, that's not me, but anyway.
Apologies.
So inside that paper, they debate how you should actually use AI on an actual practical level as an employee. Have you got any data that came through in your research how actual use cases are to maximize this human in the loop augmentation type piece? I'd like a question. Like, if you could answer, that'd be great. And then a quick one, really quickly, if you will indulge me. In the chat window, I've chucked in a link over there. Prof. Getty, you might find this interesting as well. Is I'm doing a talk actually on AI, but from a commercial perspective, which reinforces some of your things. And then also, hopefully, if I may draw from some of your research, that'd be fantastic. Thank you.
Cool.
Wonderful. Okay, a couple of references and a question and request there. And let's take the final one. Dr. Ndaka, please go ahead.
Yeah. I came when the presentation was on, but I hope this question probably you may have talked about it in the research. But I'm concerned about the aspect of AI literacy, which is something that I've noticed over years. So many people, including the AI designers themselves, lack the AI literacy and all that. And so I was wondering, among the groups that you interviewed, whether you had a control group, which was a control group, and another a control group which was like a role which was not informed about AI, or you just questioned everyone, and another group that was AI literate, so that you would understand what are their perceptions and their attitudes. I just wonder whether there was that variation so that we can know whether the attitude and perception and acceptance changes with the inclusion of AI literacy in between different kinds of groups. Thank you.
Thank you. So that's a set of really interesting questions. I don't know in what order you'd like to go through them, Dr. Ruth, and if you need any assistance from me.
Okay. Yeah, so you will just let me know if I miss anything, but I see there's 5 minutes, so I'm going to try and answer very quickly. I did note some of the questions. So I think the one question was around if in the survey there was questions around what tools people were using in terms of AI. So the questionnaire that was sent out, and maybe that might answer some of the questions, it was sent out to not only people that have experience with AI, but people without experience with AI. There was no specific control group, but it was just sent out to anyone in the organization, and they would indicate if they have experience with AI or if not. And in the comments, in the open-ended questions, there was actually comments around, people saying they don't have experience with AI and they would want to be, educated on this and learn more around that. And I guess that speaks to AI literacy. In terms of tools, the survey actually asked individuals to indicate not only what area of financial services industry they're in, but also to indicate the business application of AI that's currently being applied. And that looked at, if you look at the financial services industry, technologies used to detect fraud, or whether it was chatbots or it was AI tools used to analyze data or for credit vetting, or to authenticate, data or authorize users, for example. So individuals were able to note that, and where they didn't know, it was they'll just say they're not familiar or they don't know that. So it was also a nice opportunity to see what tools were already being used in the organization. And given that the survey was done around 2020, end of 2022, 2023 period. It was quite interesting to see the wide range of tools that were already being, implemented in the financial services industry that, either the participants were using themselves or just knew about, but were not necessarily, making use of. There was a question around, use cases for employees. In this specific study that I did, nothing, there was one or two comments that linked to or made mention of specific tools that they've used, especially in terms of credit vetting and fraud detection, and how that was used for increased efficiency. But personally, if I'm to give a practical example from my workplace, working for a technology company, I mean, we make use of AI in performance management. We use tools for that. We use for your co-pilots, your chat GPT. I mean, we use that on a daily basis. Our developers, our technical people use AI to assist, with code creation or reviewing code or even testing, code. So there's quite a few use cases, practically that are in place, and that I've also been fortunate to, be familiar with. And lastly, in terms of just to how to go about, as an individual to familiarize or make use of AI. I think the one thing I'd highlight is, I mean, I mentioned it earlier, AI is here to stay. So read about, AI, play around with a couple of tools. There's actually a free AI tools out there that one can, play around with as an individual, but also exposing your team, your team, or the initial, it can be just your team or your organization to start familiarize with, and from that start building your own, use cases, and then sharing experiences from that. I see we've run out of time, so I've just rushed through that. I hope I've answered at least one or two of the questions that came.
Thank you so much. Yes, I think maybe we can take the others, unless you want a minute or two. I think we could ask people to stay over, but are you satisfied? Are you okay? Is everybody covered, is what I'm asking, or do people want us to take a few more minutes if there are any urgent follow-ons?
Yeah, I can stick around for a minute or two, yeah?
Okay, people seem to be satisfied. Perhaps perhaps the lunch is not calling. No, but thank you for this. I mean, I think you really did dash through that one. But I think clearly there's a lot of interest in your paper. I think you've got Dr. Craig asking if he can cite you for some of what he's working on. We normally do make these sessions shared by the lunchbox. But perhaps if you're willing for your contacts to be shared, Dr. Wotela, for the personal inquiry.
That's okay. Yes, that's okay. You can go ahead and share. Yeah. Thanks.
Wonderful. But I think such a timely study at a time where I guess many of us are either experiencing these issues or in some cases researching these issues. I think that if we had more time, I would love to get more into the questions about human-centeredness and the use of attribute perception as part of perhaps a bigger suite of considerations I think one might need to have. But I think I really appreciate the depth your work has gone into, at least in trying to understand that aspect. And I think some of the connections colleagues are making as well to factors like literacy and maybe other variables, age, and things like that. Some are also picked up well in your work, and I'm sure there are more interesting explorations to come as we go further down this line. I'm keen to read the article Dr. Green has shared. There's another one I saw a few weeks ago that was also just talking about the extent of LLM use and how they see effects on the human brain and that sort of thing as well. I guess that's what this one is also doing, so I want to see what the difference is between the two papers. But the other one, basically, I think somebody shared it on LinkedIn, was indicating essentially deficiencies in people's own cognition that were resulting from overuse, if you want, overdependence. Yes. This paper might also be going further into. So I think there are also those kind of effects that are perhaps less about our attitudes and more about unsuspecting things that are happening to us as we use some of these technologies.
True.
Thank you
100%.
very much for your
Thank you so
research
much.
and for sharing. Is your thesis on Wired Space? Can people find it there if they're keen to
Yes,
dig into the
it's on.
details?
Yes, they can. They can go ahead. Yeah, it's available there.
Excellent. So for those of you who don't know, Wired Space is the Wits platform where all theses and dissertations are published, and you're welcome to find Dr. Wotela's work there. We thank you very much for your time
Thank
today.
you. Thanks so much, everyone.
And to colleagues, we look forward to seeing you at our next lunchbox
Take care.
session. Do we know what the
All right.
lunchbox session is?
7 August.
Okay, 7th of August, and it's on? To be announced. Okay, to be announced. We look forward to seeing you all again, and have a wonderful week, and may the water
Take
return
care.
for those of you in Johannesburg. All right.
Take care.
Cheers, everybody.